Good afternoon, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good day, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, the following is a collection of news from Patriots. Let's get into the news. It's crazy how things change fast. How so much can change over such a short period of time, whether it be individuals growing up and all of a sudden your boy becomes a man, your young girl, your daughter becomes a woman, the world evolves, technology hits, and all of a sudden society changes drastically, or in such a short period of time and maybe a decade or so politics goes from relatively common sense and bipartisan truths to the Democrats going absolutely insane and losing their frickin' minds, becoming a woke zombie clones all parroting the same garbage, pseudo-academic, pseudo-intellectual talking points. And that's why Democrat inconsistency and Democrat hypocrisy flashbacks are so powerful. They take all these woke stances nowadays because that's the current trend. But if you go back just a little bit, you see the same exact Democrats thought leaders holding completely different viewpoints. And this one right over here is a real blast from the past, especially as CNN grifter Don Lemon is currently in the headlines. And so let's do a CNN Don them on flashback and talk about the woke insanity phenomenon taken over the mainstream left. Alright, folks. Here's a clip of Don Lemon from a little bit over a decade ago. You'll notice the difference almost instantly. Everyone listen to this, he says. Because black people, if you really want to fix the problem, here's just 5 things that you should think about doing. Here's number 5. And if this doesn't apply to you, if you're not doing this, then it doesn't apply to you. I'm not talking about you. Here's number 5. Pull up your pants. Walking around with your son, your underwear showing is not okay. In fact, it comes from prison when they take away belts from the prisoners so that they can't make a weapon. And then it evolved into which role a prisoner would have during male-on-male prisons. The one with the really low pants is a submissive one. You get my point. Number 4 now is the N-word. By promoting the use of that word when it's not germane to the conversation. Have you ever considered that you may just be perpetuating the stereotype the master intended, acting like? Now number 3, respect where you live. Start small by not dropping trash littering in your own communities. I've lived in several predominantly white neighborhoods in my life. I rarely, if ever, witnessed people littering. I live in Harlem now. It's an historically black neighborhood. Every single day, I see adults and children dropping their trash on the ground when a garbage can is just feet away. Just being honest here. Number 2, finish school. You want to break the cycle of poverty. Stop telling kids are acting white because they go to school or they speak proper English. The high school dropout makes on average $19,000 a year. The high school graduate makes $28,000 a year. A college graduate makes $51,000 a year over the course of a career. A college grad will make nearly $1 million more than a high school graduate. That's a lot of money. And number 1, and probably the most important, just because you can have a baby, it doesn't mean you should. Especially without planning for one or getting married first. More than 72% of children in the African American community are born out of wedlock. That means absent fathers. And the studies show that lack of a male role model is an express train right to prison. And the cycle continues. Okay, folks. Now that CNN Don the Mind flashback right over there essentially proves that little Lemonhead is nothing but a grifter. Recently little CNN, Danny's name has been in the news. Some of the viral controversial moments that he's been involved in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks where he's been showing his true colors. The real Don the Mind has been showing itself in a more conversation form on his morning show. And so it shows you the difference between publicly held beliefs and actual private personal beliefs. This is what Don Lemon actually believes. He'll just never say it because he's playing a woke role on TV. And that's what all the Democrats, all the mainstream Democrat politicians are essentially doing. They don't actually believe what they say. They just say it because it's the woke trendy thing to do. That little CNN clip is probably what they're all saying behind closed doors. Those are probably the talking points that most elitist Democrats agree with. They'll just never say it publicly because that's the crazy backwards world that we live in. Don Lemon can say what he wants about Nikki Haley. Democrats can issue the most insane, vitriolic, violent talking points targeting Donald Trump and other right-wingers. They can say the most insane woke stuff you could possibly imagine. They can push medical procedures for minors or talking about the age of consent being lower than it already is. And they'll get away with all of that, of course, Because it fits the woke doctrine, even some of the talking points that they have where they've rebranded the worst type of human being to minor attracted people. Some of the absolutely despicable talking points that we've heard recently related to that topic of discussion from the woke left. They could say all of that and it's a non-issue. But if Don Lemond was to say what Don Lemond was saying on TV 10 years ago today, will he be cancelled in a flash if Don Lemond said what he truly believed? Well, the Los Angeles Times would probably be releasing an article titled "Don Them on the Black Face of White Supremacy," just like they did with Larry Elder. It's funny how we just time travel 10 years ago, and all of a sudden the Democrat collective opinion, all the rhetoric is completely different. Now they call Donald Trump and Republicans extreme, but Republican stances haven't really changed that much. In fact, I'd even argue that Republican opinions have become more moderate, and many so-called conservatives these days are closer to Bill Clinton than they are towards being a genuine conservative. Meanwhile, the left clearly has shifted. And that's why we're able to pull these flashback moments that show you this drastic total 180. I mean, just recently, with all these Democrats telling us how extreme it is that Republicans want to negotiate using the debt ceiling as a bargaining chip, how terrible and extreme that is. Meanwhile, there's like a million clips of Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and other Democrats from a couple years ago to 10 years ago, basically advocating for the same thing. I mean, Barack Obama was known as the deportee-in-chief, but now no human is illegal and borders are racist. For Pete's sakes. Joe Biden was the architect of mass incarceration, according to Cory Booker writing the 1994 crime bill, but now of course, the prevailing ideology when it comes to left-wingers in the Democrat establishment is that police officers are inherently racist or part of a systemic racist structure. Elon Musk has it right. It's the woke mind virus, and a virus spreads and it spreads quickly. And over the last decade or so, and frankly, less than a decade, Democrat thought, left-wing thought, has become so incredibly diseased and corrupted. Another great example. These are the same left droids who used to protest the military-industrial complex, and these needless endless wars, and now they're the biggest Pentagon shills imaginable, promoting conflict in Eastern Europe above all else, a bunch of war-mongering shills, and they don't even seem to be able to absorb their from one side of their mouth. They're gonna say something like, we need to take money out of the military and out of defense spending so we can fund important social programs. The military budget is bloated and we should be spending money elsewhere, and then the other side of their mouth. Oh my God, endless cash and open blank check to Ukraine, take my money, Zelensky. What do you think I'm paying taxes for over here? Entire Democrat establishment and Democrat media talking heads, the whole collective is one. The collective grift of these people actually believe what they say. They just give in to whatever is culturally relevant, whatever the cultural now trend is. They purposely ignore the truth regardless of whether or not they actually know better. In most cases, they do know better, they'll just never admit it. Although that's kind of the unfortunate thing for them. 10 years ago, they essentially were admitting the truth, and that's why these flashback moments are so incredibly potent. It's funny how things change. It's an interesting phenomenon to observe the Democrat left-wing body politic in its diseased downward spiral after being infected by the cultural woke mind virus. And this is some big news. Quote, so let's talk about Biden's trip to Ukraine. Oh, like you said, it could not uncommon a worse time is actually going where he needs to go. Trump, of course, going to Ohio, while Biden parades around. Susan says, what is your take on the Biden trip to Ukraine? I heard Putin gave permission for Biden to go. Do you think that people will start to wake up more? Because he went to Ukraine before? Ohio? I think so. I think optically it was a disaster. Just, one of the things I do, I sort of counter-read the lamestream media, when you look at how far they go, to try to sell you on the fact that this is great. This is exactly what Biden needed to do around this 1 year mark, February 24th, be the 1 year mark. And he's sticking it to Putin. And he's Grant upstaging Putin and all this sort of stuff. And you're kind of going with all of these American citizens suffering at home, particularly what may in fact end up being the worst environmental disaster in our nation's history in East Palestine. It just couldn't come at a worse time, and the optics couldn't have been more horrific. Look, you're seeing something's very interesting. And a lot of people are recognizing both the populist right as well as the populist left. So Jimmy Dore, or Russell Brand would fall into these things. You're seeing one of the reasons why billionaires and bureaucrats are hooking up is very interesting. And again, this is part of some of the studies I've been availing myself on authoritarian studies and tyranny studies. There is a field of study known as authoritarian studies, which is very, very fascinating field, actually goods horrifying when you go, wow. Sounds like they're just describing what's happening today. But one of the reasons why particularly liberals, but the permanent political class in general, is aligning themselves with the business class, with big business, big tech, obviously, to censor, but one of the reasons why, they're aligning themselves with Soros and Bezos, all these people, is because authoritarian regimes need cash flow, irrespective, totally independent of their populations. The more a regime is dependent on the support of its populations, the more they have to govern in accordance with the values of those populations. But if a government wants to govern according to its own values, and that state autonomy theories is your modern state, its natural propensities not to represent the values, interests, concerns of constituents, but rather, the values, interests, and concerns of bureaucrats. In other words, states exist, generally, unless they are linked in with what's known as redemptive democracy, unless they're linked in with their constituents, their voting populations. If they're linked in there, then they have to represent their values, interests, concerns, so they get voted out of office. The more governments can amputate themselves from being dependent on the support of their constituent populations, the more they can govern in accordance with their own values, interests, and concerns. But in order to do that, you got to have cash flow, you've got to be able to have some money coming in, as it were support coming in. That's not dependent on the people. And that's where the billionaire class comes in. That's where the donor class comes in. You see it in the Middle East, where all these regimes in the Middle East don't depend on the support of their people for their perpetuation. They depend on the black gold they find underground, right? They depend on oil. Oil gives them the cash flow. They need to be able to govern irrespective of how the people decide. Now it's a balancing act. No question. But nevertheless, I think that's what we're seeing here with Zelensky, and just this absolutely brazen, this brazen flaunting of political class values that completely denigrate and dismiss the values and concerns of the people, that can only Biden and the permanent political class, the Lindsey Grahams and all, that can only do that to the extent that they are financially supported and legitimated by a whole class, completely amputated from the people and I think that's exactly what you're seeing. Ukraine is a cash cow. We all saw what happened with that. What is his name? Gold. The billionaire who's caught faking money. Why am I forgetting his name? You guys could throw it in the chat. But we found that he was giving money to Democrats. Democrats and Republicans together were giving money to Ukraine, and then Ukraine was funneling that money. So I don't know why gold of my head, Sandra SPF. And then they were funneling that money back to the Democrats via SPF. And because SPF was getting money through his digital platform, currency platform, in the name of helping Ukrainian forces and relief for humanitarian aid and the like, but in as part of the exchange money, actual cash for the digital currencies he was getting a kickback, and that kickback was ending up in Democrats' pockets. All of that is part of authoritarian regimes, and their independence. They're the structures that they build for themselves, that enable them to govern, irrespective of and often in, absolutely, contrary to the values and interesting concerns the people. It doesn't like it. Well, let's put it this way. Once the cash dries up, they fall apart. Doesn't necessarily last, but that's what they have to do. And that's basically what I see Biden doing, as he's paying homage to Zelensky as more or less up reputation laundering of actual literal money laundering. I mean, he has to do this in order to keep the powers that be happy. So the money is flowing, so that they can continue to ignore us. It'll fail in the end, but it's very frustrating as it goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, give me your thoughts below. And hit subscribe right now.